The desperate hour. The siege of Callisto Station. Commander Thane stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Starbreaker, his forearms crossed in growing frustration. Through the massive viewport, he could see the sprawling structure of Callisto Station hanging in space like a metal flower, its research pods extending outward like petals. For 6 long months, his fleet of 200 Zephyrian warships had surrounded this human outpost, yet it remained stubbornly intact. The humans called it their most important research facility in this sector. To the Zephyrians, it was an abomination built on sacred ground. The standoff had cost both sides dearly, with supply lines stretched thin and diplomatic relations crumbling by the day. "Status report," Thane commanded, his voice echoing through the bridge with the authority earned through decades of military service. Lieutenant Vex, his tactical officer, approached with visible reluctance. "Sir, the humans continue to maintain their defensive positions. Our attempts to breach their shields have been unsuccessful. They've managed to adapt to every strategy we've employed." Thane's inner eyelids flickered with annoyance. The Zephyrian Empire had conquered star systems with ease, their military might unquestioned throughout the galaxy. Yet these humans, barely a century into space travel, had managed to hold them at bay with nothing more than clever engineering and stubborn determination. "What about the blockade?" Thane asked. "Effective, sir. No supply ships have reached the station in 3 weeks. Their resources must be running low." Despite the tactical advantage, Thane felt no satisfaction. The Zephyrian way of war was swift and decisive. This prolonged siege went against every instinct his people possessed. Moreover, the longer they remained here, the more other species throughout the galaxy watched and whispered. Some were beginning to question Zephyrian supremacy. The unexpected arrival. The bridge's communication array suddenly crackled to life, interrupting Thane's brooding thoughts. "Sir," called the communications officer, "we're receiving a transmission from an approaching vessel." "It's human." "Impossible," Vex interjected. "Our blockade is airtight. Nothing could have slipped through." Thane moved to the tactical display, his elongated fingers dancing across the controls. There, on the edge of sensor range, was indeed a human vessel, but what he saw made him pause in confusion. The ship was tiny by military standards, barely larger than a Zephyrian shuttle. Its design suggested it was a research vessel, not a warship. "Magnify," Thane ordered. The image resolved to show a sleek but modest craft, with UES Prometheus painted along its hull. Compared to the massive Zephyrian dreadnoughts surrounding Callisto Station, it looked like a minnow swimming among sharks. "Sir," the communications officer announced, "the vessel is requesting permission to approach." "They claim they want to negotiate." A rumble of laughter echoed through the bridge. Several junior officers couldn't contain their amusement at the audacity of such a small craft attempting to broker peace where mighty fleets had failed. "Patch them through," Thane commanded, curious despite himself. The main screen flickered, revealing the bridge of the human vessel. At its center stood a woman in her 40s, her brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her uniform bore the insignia of a captain, though by human standards, she commanded what barely qualified as a scout ship. "I am Captain Sarah Chen of the United Earth Survey Ship Prometheus," she said, her voice steady and professional. "I'm requesting permission to approach Callisto Station to discuss a peaceful resolution to this conflict." The bridge erupted in barely suppressed chuckles. Lieutenant Vex stepped forward, his translator rendering his words in perfect English. "Captain Chen, with respect, you command a single research vessel. Our fleet numbers 200 warships. What could you possibly offer that would change the situation?" Captain Chen's expression remained calm, though Thane detected a slight smile at the corners of her mouth. "Sometimes, Commander, the size of the fleet matters less than the size of the idea behind it." The gamble. The comment silenced the bridge. Thane studied the human captain more carefully. There was something in her demeanor that suggested confidence beyond what her circumstances should allow. In his experience, such confidence usually meant one of two things: either complete delusion or knowledge of something others didn't possess. Captain Chen, Thane said, stepping forward so the human could see him clearly, I am Commander Thane of the Zephyrian Empire. What you're requesting is extraordinarily unusual. A single ship wishes to mediate between a military fleet and a fortified station. That's correct, Commander. And I understand your skepticism, but I'm asking for just 72 hours. If I can't resolve this situation in that time, I'll withdraw and leave you to continue your siege. The request sparked immediate debate among Thane's officers. Several argued that allowing any human vessel to approach would set a dangerous precedent. Others pointed out that the siege had already dragged on for 6 months without results. Lieutenant Vex voiced the concern many shared. Sir, this could be some sort of human trick. Perhaps the vessel carries weapons we haven't detected. Thane considered this, but his tactical instincts dismissed the possibility. The Prometheus had been thoroughly scanned. It was exactly what it appeared to be. A lightly armed research vessel with a crew of perhaps 30 humans. Even if they had hostile intentions, they posed no significant threat to his massive fleet. More intriguingly, Thane found himself genuinely curious about what approach the humans might take. In 6 months of warfare, they had demonstrated remarkable creativity in their defensive strategies. Perhaps their diplomatic methods would prove equally innovative. Very well, Captain Chen, Thane announced, his decision surprising even himself. You have permission to approach Callisto Station. But understand this, you will be under constant observation, and any hostile action will result in your immediate destruction. Understood completely, Commander. I appreciate your willingness to listen. First Contact Protocol. As the Prometheus moved through the Zephyrian fleet toward Callisto Station, Thane monitored its progress with growing fascination. The small ship made no attempt at stealth or deception. Instead, it broadcast continuously on multiple frequencies, apparently establishing contact not only with the station, but with several of the surrounding Zephyrian vessels as well. Sir, the communications officer reported, the human vessel is transmitting data packages to our ships. They appear to be cultural and historical files. What kind of cultural files? Thane demanded. Information about human diplomatic protocols, historical examples of conflict resolution, and, sir, they're also requesting similar information from us. They want to understand Zephyrian culture and history. This was unprecedented. In Thane's experience, most species approach diplomacy as an extension of warfare by other means. The humans, however, seem to view it as an entirely different discipline, one requiring mutual understanding rather than superior leverage. As the Prometheus docked with Callisto Station, Thane received a communication request from Captain Chen. When her image appeared on his screen, she was no longer on her ship's bridge, but in what appeared to be a conference room aboard the station. Commander Thane, she began, I want to thank you again for this opportunity. Before we proceed, I have a question that might seem unusual. Proceed. Why is this location so important to your people? I've read the official reports about territorial expansion and strategic value, but I suspect there's more to the story. The question caught Thane off guard. In 6 months of conflict, no human had asked about Zephyrian motivations beyond the obvious military ones. They had simply assumed the Empire wanted the station for its strategic value, or the territory it represented. For a moment, Thane hesitated. The true reason for the siege was deeply personal to his people, rooted in religious and cultural beliefs that outsiders rarely understood. But something in Captain Chen's tone suggested genuine interest rather than tactical probing. The breakthrough. Captain Chen, Thane said slowly, what I'm about to tell you is not widely known outside Zephyrian space. This system, where your station now sits, was once the location of Veltar, one of our most sacred sites. He paused, noting how Chen leaned forward with obvious attention rather than dismissal. Veltar was a moon that served as a burial ground for our ancestors for over 2 millennia. It was destroyed in a natural disaster 3 centuries ago, but the space itself remains holy to us. When we discovered that humans had built their research station in the exact coordinates where Veltar once orbited, many of our people saw it as desecration. Captain Chen was quiet for several moments, absorbing this information. When she spoke, her voice carried a tone of understanding that surprised Thane. "Commander, why didn't anyone tell us this? If we had known we were building on a sacred site, we would never have chosen this location." The simplicity of her response stunned Thane. "You would have abandoned a strategically valuable position simply out of respect for our beliefs." "Of course. That's what decent people do." Chen paused, then added, "But more than that, I think there might be a solution here that serves both our people's needs." For the first time in months, Thane felt a spark of something he had almost forgotten: hope. The human captain had not only listened to his people's concerns, but had done so without judgment or dismissal. More remarkably, she seemed to genuinely care about finding a resolution that honored Zephyrian beliefs. "What kind of solution?" Thane asked. "I need to make some calls and do some research," Chen replied. "But I believe we can turn this conflict into something much more valuable than either of our governments originally imagined. Can you give me 24 hours? Thane looked around his bridge at officers who had spent 6 months preparing for battle. For the first time since the siege began, he saw curiosity replacing frustration in their expressions. "You have 24 hours, Captain Chen." As the communication ended, Lieutenant Vex approached his commander with obvious confusion. "Sir, do you really think one human can succeed where our entire fleet has not?" Thane continued staring at the screen where Chen's image had been, his mind turning over the conversation they had just had. In all his years of military service, he had never encountered an enemy who had asked about his people's deepest motivations with such genuine interest. "Vex," he said finally, "I'm beginning to think we may have been asking the wrong questions entirely." The bridge fell silent as the crew contemplated this possibility. Outside the viewport, Callisto Station continued its orbit, no longer looking quite so much like an enemy fortress. For the first time in 6 months, Commander Thane allowed himself to consider that there might be an end to this siege that didn't require anyone to lose. The human solution. The truth revealed. Captain Sarah Chen spent the next 18 hours in intensive research and communication with both human and Zephyrian sources. She had assembled a team of cultural anthropologists, historians, and engineers aboard Callisto Station, working through what should have been their sleep cycles to understand the full scope of the situation. When she finally requested another meeting with Commander Thane, her appearance showed the strain of nearly a full day without rest. But her eyes held an intensity that immediately captured the Zephyrian commander's attention. "Commander Thane," she began without preamble, "I spent the last day learning everything I can about Veltar and its significance to your people. What I've discovered is both tragic and, I believe, an opportunity for something unprecedented." Thane settled into his command chair, gesturing for his senior officers to gather around. Word of the human captain's research had spread throughout the fleet, and many were curious about what she had uncovered. Veltar wasn't just a burial ground, Chen continued, bringing up holographic displays that showed ancient Zephyrian texts and architectural plans. It was a center of learning. Your ancestors didn't just bury their dead there, they built libraries, observatories, and research centers. It was where Zephyrian scholars made their greatest discoveries about astronomy, physics, and medicine. Lieutenant Vex leaned forward, clearly surprised by the depth of Chen's research. "Captain, how did you learn about the scholarly traditions of Veltar?" "Much of that information is not widely known even among our own people." Chen smiled for the first time since the negotiations began. "That's where things get interesting, Lieutenant. When we built Callisto Station, we chose this location because our sensors detected unusual energy readings and gravitational anomalies that suggested rich scientific possibilities. We didn't realize we were detecting the remnants of ancient Zephyrian technology." She activated another holographic display, showing detailed scans of the space around the station. "Your ancestors built more than just burial sites here. They created a network of research installations that survived the moon's destruction. The energy signatures we've been studying for the past 3 years are actually data caches and experimental records left by Zephyrian scientists from centuries ago. The revelation sent a wave of astonishment through Thane's bridge crew. Several officers began speaking at once in their native language, their excitement palpable even through the universal translator. "You're saying," Thane said slowly, "that our ancestors' scientific work has been preserved in this location." "Not just preserved," Chen replied. "Enhanced. Our research teams have been unknowingly building upon discoveries made by Zephyrian scholars centuries ago. We've been studying stellar phenomena that your ancestors first catalogued, advancing theories they originally proposed." Cultural bridge. The implications of Chen's discovery began to sink in throughout both fleets. On the human side, researchers aboard Callisto Station worked frantically to compile their findings and correlate them with the ancient Zephyrian data. Among the Zephyrian ships, news of the revelation spread from vessel to vessel, creating an atmosphere of wonder that hadn't existed in months. But Chen wasn't finished. "Commander Thane, what if I told you that the conflict between our peoples has actually been protecting something invaluable to both our civilizations?" "What do you mean?" "The siege has kept this location isolated and secure. While we've been focused on the military standoff, the research teams have made breakthrough discoveries that could benefit both humanity and the Zephyrian Empire. We've unlocked new forms of energy generation, advanced medical techniques, and astronomical research that builds directly on your ancestors' work." Chen paused, allowing the significance of her words to register. "But more than that, we've discovered that the ancient Zephyrian scholars deliberately designed this location to be collaborative. The research installations were built to accommodate multiple species working together." Lieutenant Vex's translator crackled as he spoke rapidly in Zephyrian before switching to Standard Galactic. "Captain Chen, are you suggesting that our ancestors intended this site to be shared?" "I'm not suggesting it, Lieutenant. I'm stating it as fact. We found their records. The final entries speak of their hope that future civilizations would build upon their work together, combining different perspectives and approaches to unlock the universe's secrets." The memorial proposal. Commander Thane stood silently for several minutes, processing the information Chen had presented. His officers waited respectfully, understanding that their commander was considering implications that extended far beyond military strategy. Finally, Thane spoke. "Captain Chen, assuming everything you've said is accurate, what are you proposing?" Chen took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would determine whether the past 6 months led to continued conflict or unprecedented cooperation. "I propose that we establish the Veltar Memorial Research Institute," she announced, "a joint facility operated by both human and Zephyrian scientists, dedicated to continuing the work your ancestors began. Callisto Station would be expanded and renamed, with sections dedicated to honoring the memory of those buried here, while advancing scientific knowledge that benefits both our peoples." The bridge fell completely silent. The audacity of the proposal was breathtaking. Chen was suggesting that they transform a siege situation into a collaborative enterprise, turning former enemies into research partners. The memorial aspect would include proper burial chambers for any remains we can recover from the moon's destruction. Chen continued. "We've actually located several preserved sections of the original burial sites, maintained in stable orbits by the ancient Zephyrian technology. We can incorporate these into the station design, creating spaces where your people can come to honor their ancestors while working alongside human researchers." Thane's expression remained unreadable, but Chen could see the mental calculations taking place behind his eyes. He was weighing not just the proposal's immediate implications, but its potential impact on relations between their two civilizations. "Captain," Thane said carefully, "what you're suggesting would require approval from the highest levels of both our governments." "I've already been in contact with Earth Command," Chen replied. "They're intrigued by the possibilities, especially given the scientific breakthroughs we've achieved. But, Commander, The real question is whether your people would consider such a collaboration. Zephyrian honor. Thane turned to his officers, switching to his native language for a rapid discussion that grew increasingly animated. Chen watched with growing tension as voices rose and gestures became more emphatic. Finally, Thane raised one of his 4 hands, and the bridge fell silent. "Captain Chen," he said, "you have presented us with something we never expected. A path forward that honors our past while building our future. But such a decision requires more than military approval." Chen nodded, understanding the complexity of what she was asking. "What would you need?" "I must consult with the Council of Elders on our homeworld. They are the guardians of our ancestors' memory, and the final authority on matters involving sacred sites." "How long would that take?" "Normally, several weeks. But given the unprecedented nature of your proposal, I can request an emergency session." Thane paused, then added, "Captain, I want you to understand that what you've suggested could transform relations between our peoples. But if the elders reject the proposal, we will be honor-bound to continue our original mission." Chen met his gaze steadily. "I understand completely, Commander, but I believe your ancestors would approve of what we're suggesting. From what I've learned about them, they were scholars and explorers who valued knowledge above conquest." Over the next 48 hours, the dynamics of the siege changed dramatically. While they waited for the Council of Elders' decision, informal communications began between human and Zephyrian personnel. Scientists on both sides shared research data, comparing human discoveries with ancient Zephyrian records. The results were remarkable. Alliance forged. When Commander Thane finally received the Council's response, he requested a joint meeting that included not only Captain Chen, but also the senior researchers from Callisto Station and his own fleet's science officers. "The Council of Elders has deliberated," Thane announced to the assembled group. "They have examined the evidence you presented and consulted the most ancient records of Veltar's purpose." Chen held her breath, knowing that the next few words would determine whether her gamble had succeeded or failed. "The Council has voted unanimously to approve the establishment of the Veltar Memorial Research Institute," Thane continued. "They are moved by the respect you have shown for our ancestors and excited by the possibility of continuing their work through collaboration rather than isolation." The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Human researchers cheered while Zephyrian officers expressed their approval through the complex hand gestures of their culture. Chen felt tears in her eyes as she realized that 6 months of siege were ending not in victory or defeat, but in partnership. But Thane wasn't finished. The Council has also made an additional decision. They are authorizing the transfer of additional ancient Zephyrian archives to the Institute, records that have never before been shared with other species. They believe that the collaborative approach you've demonstrated proves that the time has come to open our greatest scientific treasures to joint exploration. Dr. Maria Santos, Callisto Station's chief researcher, spoke up for the first time. "Commander, the implications of this collaboration could revolutionize our understanding of space-time physics, energy generation, and biological systems. We're talking about advances that could benefit every species in the galaxy." Lieutenant Vex, who had been skeptical of human intentions from the beginning, addressed Chen directly. "Captain, I must admit that when your small ship first approached our fleet, I thought you were either brave or foolish. I now realize you were something far more valuable. Wise." The aftermath. Within a week of the agreement, the transformation began. Zephyrian construction ships arrived not as conquerors, but as collaborators, working alongside human engineers to expand Callisto Station according to designs that honored ancient traditions while incorporating cutting-edge technology from both civilizations. The first joint research teams began working immediately, and the results exceeded everyone's expectations. Human creativity and innovation, combined with Zephyrian precision and historical knowledge, created breakthroughs that neither species could have achieved alone. News of the Veltar Accord spread throughout the galaxy with unprecedented speed. Other species watched in amazement as a military standoff transformed into a model of interspecies cooperation. Several civilizations requested permission to send their own researchers to participate in the Institute's work. Captain Chen found herself promoted to Director of Interspecies Relations, a position created specifically to manage the growing number of collaborative projects emerging from the success at Veltar. Commander Thane accepted a similar role within the Zephyrian Empire, overseeing military and scientific cooperation with other species. Legacy. 6 months after the siege ended, Chen and Thane stood together on the observation deck of the newly expanded Veltar Memorial Research Institute. Through the massive windows, they could see ships from a dozen different species approaching the station, all coming to participate in research projects that had grown from their initial collaboration. Captain, Thane said, using her old title despite her promotion, "I've been thinking about that first day you approached our fleet in your small ship. What about it?" My officers laughed because they couldn't imagine how one human ship could succeed where our entire fleet had failed. They were thinking about the problem incorrectly. Chen smiled, remembering her own nervousness during that first approach. How so? They assumed success meant military victory. You understood that success meant finding a solution where everyone could win. As they watched another research vessel dock with the station, Chen reflected on how different things might have been if either side had chosen the path of continued conflict. Instead, the impossible siege had become the foundation for an alliance that was reshaping galactic civilization. "Commander," she said, "do you think our peoples will remember this as a military conflict or as the beginning of a new era of cooperation?" Thane's expression showed the satisfaction of someone who had witnessed history being made. "I think, Director Chen, they will remember it as the day humanity taught the galaxy that the greatest victories are won not through superior firepower, but through superior understanding." The Veltar Memorial Research Institute continued to grow, becoming a symbol throughout the galaxy of what could be achieved when different species chose collaboration over conflict. And at its heart remained the simple truth that Captain Sarah Chen had demonstrated. Sometimes one ship, carrying the right idea at the right moment, really was enough to change everything.